The war had been over for 3 months when Princess Zara of the Velthian Empire arrived at the human colony on Meridian Station, and her presence was not announced through diplomatic channels, but through a direct transmission that bypassed every security protocol the humans had in place. Lieutenant Katie Morgan was the first to receive the message, and she stood frozen in the communications bay as the holographic image of the alien princess materialized before her, with skin like polished silver and eyes that shifted between violet and deep blue and a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. Despite being only a projection, we asked for peace and your kind granted it. But now I ask for something more personal, the princess said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. And I need one of your people to help me forget. Katie had heard stories about the Velthians, and everyone in the colony had, and they were a warrior race that had nearly wiped out 3 star systems before humanity had somehow negotiated a ceasefire, and the princess herself was said to have led the final assault on the Krythos worlds and witnessed things that even her own people refused to speak about. The colony administrator, Lisa Chen, was summoned immediately, and she arrived in the bay with her assistant Ben Hayes trailing behind, and both of them stared at the hologram with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Your Highness, Lisa began, and her voice was careful and measured, and we are honored by your visit, but we do not understand what you are asking. The princess turned her gaze to Lisa, and for a moment the administrator seemed to shrink under that alien stare, and then Zara spoke again, and this time there was something raw in her voice. I have seen too much death, and my mind replays the battles every moment I close my eyes, and your people have something we do not, and you have the ability to find joy in simple things and to let go of the past, and I have studied your kind, and I wish to learn this from one of you. Katie felt her heart racing because she understood what the princess was really saying, and the Velthians had won the war in every military sense, but they had lost something else in the process, and they had lost the ability to be anything other than warriors. Lisa looked around the bay as if searching for an answer in the metal walls, and then she looked at Katie, and there was a question in her eyes that Katie already knew she would say. Yes, I will help her, Katie said, and the words came out before she could stop them, and everyone turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of their stares, but she kept her eyes on the princess. The hologram flickered, and the princess studied Katie with an intensity that felt like being scanned at a molecular level, and then she nodded once. You are young, the princess observed, and do you understand what you are offering? Katie swallowed hard and nodded, and I understand that you need to remember how to live instead of just survive. The princess arrived 2 days later in a small craft that landed in the station gardens, and Katie was waiting for her along with half the security team. And when Zara emerged from the ship, she was even more imposing in person, and she stood nearly 7 feet tall, and her armor seemed to be made of living metal that shifted and flowed with her movements. Katie led her through the station and showed her the market where vendors sold fresh food and handmade crafts, and the princess moved through the crowd like a ghost, and people parted around her without even realizing they were doing it. Why do they create things that serve no practical purpose? Zara asked as she examined a carved wooden figurine of a bird. Because it makes them happy, Katie replied, and because beauty is its own purpose. The princess held the figurine for a long moment, and then carefully set it back down, as if afraid she might break it. Over the following weeks, Katie became the princess guide to human normalcy, and they visited the hydroponics gardens where Katie showed her how humans grew food, not just for nutrition, but for the pleasure of watching things grow. And they attended a concert where musicians played instruments that had no place in warfare, and they sat in the observation deck and watched the stars without discussing strategy or threat assessments. The princess rarely spoke during these excursions, and she watched everything with those shifting violet blue eyes, and Katie sometimes wondered if anything was getting through the walls the war had built around her. Then one evening they were in Katie's small quarters sharing a meal that Katie had prepared herself, and the princess suddenly spoke. I killed thousands, the princess said, and her voice was quiet. And I gave the order, and I watched their ships burn, and I told myself it was necessary. Katie set down her fork, and she did not look away. And now the war is over. Katie said gently, and now I cannot stop seeing their faces. Zara continued, and her hands trembled slightly as she held her cup. And your people fought us, and yet you do not seem to carry this weight. And how do you do this? Katie thought about this for a long time before answering. Remember, Katie said, but we also forgive ourselves for being who we had to be, and we understand that survival sometimes requires terrible choices, and then we choose to live anyway. The princess looked at her, and for the first time Katie saw something break in those alien eyes, and it was not weakness but something closer to hope. Teach me, Zara whispered. So Katie taught her, and she taught her how to laugh at simple jokes and how to appreciate music for its emotional resonance rather than its mathematical patterns, and how to sit in silence without it being filled with the ghosts of the past. And she taught her that peace was not just the absence of war, but the presence of small joys strung together like lights in the darkness. Weeks turned into months, and the princess began to change, and her armor appeared less frequently, and she started to smile at things that would have meant nothing to her before, and she learned to paint, and her first attempts were violent swirls of red and black. But slowly colors began to emerge, and blues and greens, and eventually something that looked almost like hope. One night, they sat together in the observation deck, and the princess turned to Katie with an expression that seemed almost human. Came here to forget the war, Katie said, but you have taught me something better, and you have taught me to live alongside the memory of it without being consumed. Katie smiled, and that is what peace really is. The princess reached out and took Katie's hand, and the gesture was uncertain but genuine, and thank you, she said. And for reminding me that warriors can also be people. And Katie realized that this was what humanity had to offer the galaxy, and not superior weapons or faster ships, but the stubborn refusal to let trauma define them, and the knowledge that even after the darkest nights there was still room for hope and laughter, and the simple pleasure of watching stars with a friend who had once been an enemy. The war was over, and in its place something new was beginning, and it started with one human and one alien princess learning together how to live in a universe that had finally found peace.